Welcome to SLP Nerdcast, your favorite professional resource for evidence-based practice in speech-language pathology. I'm Kate Granbois.
And I'm Amy Wonka. We are both speech-language pathologists working in the field and co-founders of SLP Nerdcast.
Each episode of this podcast is a course offered for ASHA CEUs. Our podcast audio courses are here to help you level up your knowledge and earn those professional development hours that you need. This course, plus the corresponding short post-test, is equal to 1 certificate of attendance. To earn CEUs today and take the post-test after this session, follow the link provided in the show notes or head to slpnerdcast.com.
Before we get started, one quick disclaimer. Our courses are not meant to replace clinical advice. We do not endorse products, procedures, or other services mentioned by our guests unless otherwise specified.
We hope you enjoy the course.
Are you an SLP or related professional? The SLP Nerdcast Unlimited subscription gives members access to over 100 courses offered for ASHA CEUs and certificates of attendance. With SLP Nerdcast membership, you can earn unlimited CEUs all year at any time. SLP Nerdcast courses are unique, evidence-based, with a focus on information that is useful. When you join SLP Nerdcast as a member, you'll have access to the best online platform for continuing education in speech and language pathology. Join as a member today and save 10% using code NERDCASTER10. The link for membership is in the show notes.
This episode is brought to you in part by listeners like you and by our corporate sponsor, Practice Perfect EMR. Billing, scheduling, documentation, patient communication, business metrics, and more. Practice Perfect EMR specializes in speech therapy practices like yours, connecting everything. Check them out at www.practiceperfectemr.com.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to SLP Nerdcast. Today, we are really excited to talk about burnout in schools, and we are here with our expert guest, Dr. Lisa Morante. Welcome, Lisa.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Now, Lisa, you are here to discuss ways to tackle burnout as an SLP in the school setting. And before we get started, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Of course. I'm a speech therapist. I'm a speech language pathologist, communication advocate. Sometimes I like to call myself a consultant for school-based SLPs. I have a business where I provide solutions for school SLPs who are stressed out and for school districts who want help in retaining SLPs in their schools. I've spent most of my career so far in the school setting. I'm on year 8 of my career. But for most of my journey, I felt like I've worn 2 hats, a clinician hat and then my research academic hat. So I went back to school after my clinical fellowship ended, where I was feeling extremely burnt out. I was in 2 schools my first year out, but then I went back and got my PhD with a focus on language and literacy at Florida State a couple years ago. I just finished it. And for the most part, my research interests then centered around increasing the language outcomes of students with developmental language disorders. So that's where most of my program of study focused on. But then the pandemic hit and I realized that we might need a different avenue for targeting these outcomes. Like what's impacting our SLPs from providing these evidence-based practices that we know and love and have learned so much about, but it's still not working. Something's still not working. So an avenue for helping those language outcomes for me was figuring out how to help those SLPs in the schools. And if you spend any time in the schools, you know that there are plenty of kids who are not getting the services that they want or that they need because we're understaffed or overloaded. So essentially my work from the last couple of years, last 3 years or so, has been an attempt at increasing retention of school-based SLPs, helping provide effective interventions and just figuring out what's the cause of burnout, what can we do as clinicians in this field that's so overstretched.
We've talked about burnout on this podcast before, but never specifically as it relates to individuals working in the schools. We actually were introduced to you through one of your colleagues, Dr. Kelly Farquharson, who we have interviewed before, and she referenced an article that you co-authored together called Tackling Burnout in the School Setting, Practical Tips for School-Based Speech-Language Pathologists. And I know a lot of what we're going to talk about today is rooted or derived from that article. So we will link it in the show notes, and we will likely be referencing it throughout the interview. And before we get into all of that, I do need to read our learning objectives and our disclosures. So I will try to get through that as quickly as I can. Learning objective number 1, define burnout as it relates to speech-language pathology. Learning objective number 2, list 2 reasons why the school-based SLP is susceptible to burnout. And learning objective number 3, list 3 strategies to mitigate burnout when working in a school setting. Lisa's financial disclosures. Lisa is the owner of a consulting service called School SLP Solutions that provides consulting services to school-based SLPs who experience burnout and to school districts who want support in retaining their school SLPs. Lisa also received an honorarium for participating in this course. Lisa's non-financial disclosures. Lisa is a member of ASHA SIG 16, a member of FLASHA and TISHA. Kate, that's me. I am the owner and founder of Grand Bois Therapy and Consulting, LLC, and co-founder of SLP Nerdcast. My non-financial disclosures, I'm a member of ASHA SIG 12 and serve on the AAC Advisory Group for Massachusetts Advocates for Children. I'm also a member of the Berkshire Association for Behavior Analysis and Therapy.
Amy, that's me. My financial disclosures are that I'm an employee of a public school system and co-founder of SLP Nerdcast. And my non-financial disclosures are that I am a member of ASHA Special Interest Group 12, which is AAC, and I participate in the AAC Advisory Group for Massachusetts Advocates for Children. All right, now on to the good stuff. Lisa, why don't you start us off by telling us a bit about that first learning objective? In your paper that you co-authored with Dr. Farquharson, you guys talked a lot about just defining burnout and what that is and what that looks like in the school. And I think it'd be a great place to start and just give people some background on that term.
Yeah, of course. So I think the pandemic sort of highlighted the nuances of everyone's job, not just in our field, but in every field at that time. So in turn, that made the term burnout sort of a buzzword, kind of lost its definition, its meaning across, in society. Everyone's burnt out, which is true. It can be true, but burnout is something that we all have heard about. And it's defined specifically on increased feelings of depersonalization. So the not feeling connected to what you're doing, increasing feelings of emotional exhaustion. You're feeling exhausted with your job. You feel like you're not able to give it your all because you're no longer connected, no longer feeling personalized to what you are doing. And then decreased feelings of personal accomplishment. So you don't feel like anything you're doing is working, or you feel like you're working hard, but it's not effective. And it's kind of this cycle. So with burnout, there can be physical symptoms. There can also be psychological symptoms. So sometimes there's an increase in headaches, lethargy. So you are really tired all the time. Nothing seems to be working. You're irritable. You're unable to solve problems, where you feel like everything is harder to do than you're used to. And the far end of the spectrum is exhaustion and dread. You dread to come into work. You dread to accomplish tasks that you usually don't feel that dread. But burnout is often, described as a form of emotional exhaustion, and as a result of like that fatigue that you get after overextending yourself at work. When you have these job stressors that are continuous and ongoing, and really no end in sight, and you've exhausted all of your support, all of your time, your effort, and those are called resources. Those are the resources that we use in our day-to-day life. Time, effort, money. Those are the main ones that we kind of as humans use. And when you're overextended, those get diminished. And that's what causes those symptoms of burnout. So the World Health Organization, it classifies burnout as an occupational and not an medical condition. It's not a medical condition considering, but it does have medical outcomes where you are potentially, if you let it go, if you let the burnout symptoms go, you will start feeling some medical impacts. And that's important to catch before you get there. You don't want it to be more severe where you get anxiety and depression, and it's all related in the cyclical ongoing circle of dread.
Well, I think there are many of us school-based practitioners, particularly people who work through the pandemic, who can relate to all or
Mhm.
part of those symptoms that you just described. And I think, making the point that it's sort of a continuum and you can experience some of those feelings. And I thought you guys did a really nice job with that in your paper too, just talking about how, you can have some of the pieces of burnout before it sort of becomes full on burnout. And then the idea that if you sit in that place of burnout for a really long time, it can have even farther reaching repercussions, I think is important for all of us to identify as SLPs who are potentially experiencing some of these symptoms. Um, I I was wondering in reading the article, one of the pieces that I liked a lot, and this might be an abrupt jump, so feel free to stick with burnout for a little bit if you want. But I really liked the idea about these possible stressors that SLPs have the control to change. So the
Absolutely.
idea that when you're operating within a system, there are some things, and I have these conversations with my colleagues all the time. Like there are some things we really can't change, but there are some things we can change. So I didn't know if you wanted to talk just a little bit about helping SLPs identify the difference between those two.
Yeah, and a little bit more about burnout. Burnout isn't a dichotomous variable. So you know, it's not a yes or no type of thing. You're not either burnt out or you are burnt out. You're feeling a little bit more stress this month in work because you have 20 IEPs due and you have to update. But maybe next month you're not feeling as burnt out because you have a bunch of fun things happening. It's um holiday season where you have a lot of parties and you get to have fun with your kids. So the burnout symptoms or the feelings of burnout definitely ebb and flow as your school year goes on. So those three pillars that I mentioned earlier, depersonalization, emotional exhaustion, and personal accomplishment definitely vary. And they could have varying levels just depending on your experience, depending on your situation, your school caseload. And there's just so many factors, and that's why it's very hard to address because everyone's situation is completely different from even within the school setting, within the school district, even on campus. You may have multiple SLPs on campus, and my caseload might be very different from the other speech therapists on campus, and I might not be feeling any of those increased personalization with my caseload, but she may hate it. She may um, have just a lot of issues with her new kiddos that she's not familiar with, and she might have those increased levels of depersonalization where she's like, I know nothing about my kids. Um, so to address your second question, yeah, there is a point where you have to kind of have a lot of self-awareness and say, okay, what is it that I have control over? We don't have control over legislation, things that happen like paperwork stuff that our school district or our state are requiring now because of a due process that we had no idea 3 districts over, that we have a new form we have to do because of that. However, what we do have control is when we complete that form, what we do to incorporate more paperwork time in our schedule and who we can delegate these things to. There's many things that we can control versus things that are just out of our control. I mean, I kind of redundant there, but just there's a lot of things that we cannot control in the school setting, and then a lot of it is money, our time, and all the things that we have to do on our roles and responsibilities. But we have to remember as speech therapists, our main goal is to increase our kids' communication skills and have fun. I always tell them, like my clients, like, have fun with what you do. You came into this field for a reason. And if you feel like not doing therapy today because you have just spent 2 hours doing paperwork before the session, then play a game. You are still targeting your goals some way or another. So yeah, the first thing is identifying what is it that you can't change. And then it's like this locus of control. What is it that you can control? And then you can tackle that first. So the things that we can control might look differently across your years. However, that you're still working on that thing. You're still working on, okay, this my schedule causes me a lot of stress and anxiety, but this year I'm going to take control over it and not let my paperwork time go by the wayside. I'm going to make sure that my paperwork time stays my paperwork time, and be really stern about it with my coworkers, make sure that they can't spring meetings on, make sure that I use all my strategies to make sure no one comes into my room while I'm writing my reports. Because I've also had to do that. Like, my door is not open. I'm not going to get up to open it. I'm putting a do not disturb sign so that I can write.
I love the idea of signage on your office door to sort of set that boundary.
Mhm.
I have so many colleagues who often complain that they have so much paperwork to do, but can't do their paperwork at work because they have a shared office, or because someone's always in the hallway asking them a question, or they get caught up doing X, Y, or Z. And I really appreciate the gentle reminder that we do have the control and capacity to set boundaries, and we can do that kindly without creating a lot of discomfort. And I think a visual sign is a great way to, hanging a sign on the office door or putting in your ear pods. Sometimes I would put in AirPods without even playing music just because it looks like I'm not available. So thinking about how to establish some of those boundaries is a great idea. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about why burnout in the schools is its own unique thing. You mentioned a lot of barriers or contributing factors to burnout that are out of our control, like legislation. Are there components of that make burnout in the schools more unique when compared to other settings?
So burnout can happen with any job. It's an occupational hazard because occupational stress is it's a caveat of working, something that's high stakes. We need our job, we need to keep our job, we need to do our job well so that we can make our payments, pay our bills. It's a livelihood type thing. So burnout can happen in any situation. It can also happen in other aspects of our life, like motherhood. It can happen in parenthood when you do something that's high stress for a prolonged period of time. In the schools, and the literature shows, any helping profession, any profession that you are with others, you have contact with people, you're doing things you're managing a lot of human capabilities, right? You're managing what you say to someone else, you are dealing with other people's expectations, emotions. So the burnout literature in the education setting is similar to the literature in a medical field. So nurses also burn out really easily because they're also in high stress situations where there's prolonged for a long period, or if the stress happens over a long period of time. So in the schools, there's high stakes. We are teaching young minds, and we are making sure that what we teach our young youth, when we teach our youth, and we're working with kids who have language disorders or communication disorders, there's a lot at stake. There's a lot of factors that are at play, and a lot of those factors impact how we do our job well. And I wish we didn't have those things. I wish we didn't have an issue with place, like where do we give therapy? That's a big thing, because our schools, not even for speech therapy, but our schools are understaffed. There's way more kids than need to be in the schools right now. There's not enough schools to have small classroom sizes, so they need all the space they can get. So that's not something that is in our control. Like Amy was saying, like, it's not in our control. It needs to be of where it's not in our control of where we provide therapy. If you have a huge classroom to provide therapy, that's a very good thing. That's a great thing. So that's probably not one of your stressors. That where am I going to provide therapy today is not one of the things that happen that come across your mind. That's not one of your stressors. That's not going to impact your burnout. But not getting paid enough, that's also not in our control. That's going to be a stressor, because you're doing all this hard work, and you're not, at the end of the month, you're not getting enough money to make your bills, make ends meet. Because that's also happening right now across, not just for school therapists, but for everybody in the education system. I know many teachers who have multiple jobs and kids that they have to hang out with after school too. They spend their whole day hanging out with kids, and then they have to go home and still stay on and do things at home with their family and then go to multiple jobs. So it's an ongoing thing of just being on constantly. That's why we see a lot of burnout in the schools. There's just so much time in the day. There's not enough time in the day to get all the things that we need to do done well. And I think it was Kelly actually, who she said something really insightful for me while I was doing my PhD. Right now you're juggling a lot of balls, right? You're juggling a lot. You have to decide which balls are rubber and which balls are glass. Some of them can be dropped. The rubber ones can be dropped because they can bounce right back up and you'll pick them up. The glass ones can't get dropped. So getting good grades in your PhD probably is one of those rubber balls that you don't need because you're at the end of your education. You're still needing to learn, right? Making sure you still want to do things well, but making sure that you are still writing, that your dissertation completed. Those are the glass balls that you can't drop because you don't want to be in your PhD for 7 years. You need to make sure that you figure that out. Same with for the clients that I see that work with burnout. Okay, so what are some things that can get dropped in your situation right now? Yeah, you don't have to do RTI right now for those students. You can delegate that task. You don't have to see them yourself. You can collaborate with your teachers, provide the strategies that you would be doing to your teachers who see them more often than you can. Maybe if RTI is one of those stressors for you, that can be a rubber ball. Right now, the glass ball for you might be paperwork. Paperwork shouldn't go by the wayside because that is the one that is going to get us. That's probably the one that's going to be the most litigious if we drop it. Therapy might not need to be pretty. Therapy can be very spontaneous. It can be reading a book with your students. You don't need to have the fanciest, prettiest laminated materials to do good therapy. So that might be one of those rubber balls that might get dropped for this month or however that season you're feeling the burnout. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
I love this analogy so much. I'm already doing mental inventory of my rubber balls and glass balls. It's not looking good over here. That's a separate conversation.
That analogy can go ahead.
I was just going to say, the analogy is it's very true, but really helps us compartmentalize and acknowledge that we can't do everything. We are not bottomless wells of emotional bandwidth. It also makes me think about the pressure that maybe I put on myself to be the perfect therapist or to make sure that my laminated materials are cut beautifully and I'm prepared and polished. All of that is fake. All of that is in my mind. And it's making me just reflect on that personally. I'm thinking about my colleagues and other people I know out there who bring a lot of that internalized pressure to the table, and feel that, that all of the balls are glass, that we can't mess up in any capacity. I really appreciated all of that.
Yeah. And you said something that, resonated too. We feel like we need to do everything, but we shouldn't need to do everything. We are the expert in the building for speech and language and literacy, but we can delegate our tasks. We can collaborate. Collaboration is also one of those buzzwords, but if you do it well, and it does take some time. I think I was in my last school for 4 years, and the third and fourth year were the years that collaboration was perfect. It did take me a good chunk to get it going, but it saved me so much time those third and fourth years because the teachers already knew, okay, yep, these are the things that I have to look out for. Oh, she's not going to get qualified with one speech sound. Let's work on that in the classroom. I'm not even going to bother Miss Morante with a referral for that sound. That sound's not appropriate, or the sound is appropriate. It's age related. So giving that information and collaborating and working with teachers takes time, but it's also one of those that can save you a lot of time. And we shouldn't have to do everything because we're not trained to do everything. We're trained to be the speech and language expert in the building. And therapy can look different for everybody. And I think that's part of, I mentioned this in the article. Setting boundaries for others and ourselves is really important. And it, like you said earlier, it doesn't have to be mean. Boundaries are only mean when the person you're talking to or you're putting the boundary for is surprised by that boundary, or they were using you for that information, right? So if you put a boundary, you say no to that person, and that person gets offended, that person was using that space before that boundary was put in place. So it shouldn't bother anybody if you put boundaries. You say, hey, I can't do that this week. We're not going to do another evaluation. Let's give them 2 more weeks of intervention, see where we go from there, to allow some more flexibility on my schedule. And some of these examples I'm using might not always fare well in some school districts, right? Some school districts are very particular about processes. So just take my examples as just what they are, examples. It might not be really specific for your setting, but if you are in any way resonating with some of these examples, it can be done. Putting boundaries, saying no to the IEP meeting that you can't make. Like, no, I'm not going to do a 4 o'clock IEP meeting. That's after my contract hours. I'm not available. If you say that and you continue to say that, they are not going to schedule another time. You're going to find another time that works for everyone. Other people get accommodated. Why not the speech therapist? We give an example in that paper where spontaneous IEP meetings is also happens often, where like, oh, we had an IEP meeting, we forgot this person had speech. Sorry, legally you had to give me 7 days notice. And knowing, that's another thing, we didn't mention this in the article, knowing your legislation is really important, and it will give you a lot of power to, like, knowledge is power. If you know the rules, if you know legally what you are requesting, like I can't just show up and update your IEP. I need time to do that. To be effective and to be well done, I need time. And so putting that boundary can alleviate that stress of all of a sudden.
So many things.
So many things,
So
yes.
I'm sitting here
feel like-
watching Amy's wheels turn. I know that there's going to be something good coming.
Amy, I want to know what your stressors are, so I can.
I think that so there are so many things. I think that for myself, at least, and I'm sure that there are other SLPs out there, part of what we're doing in the field is we're trying to help people, but we're also sort of people pleasers. And so the idea of setting boundaries can be super challenging. And I think that's an important point of self-reflection as the SLP, to recognize if that's something that's hard for you, but also recognize that that's a challenge you probably need to step up to the plate for if you're also experiencing feelings of burnout, because without setting those boundaries in place, it's going to be awfully hard. I mean, we'll talk more about some of the strategies that you mentioned in the article about addressing burnout, but a lot of those involve like setting boundaries and standing up for yourself. So we also may need to do some work ourselves to get more comfortable with setting those boundaries. And I think the idea of the sign on the door is such a nice, like, not scary or not as scary thing to do compared to, some of the crucial conversations. I'll ask you about that later. You guys talk about that in the paper. But at the end of the day, by setting these limits and setting these boundaries, we're not only advocating for what's best for us, we're advocating for what's best for our students. Because when we're burnt out and when we're experiencing all of those like cluster of symptoms that you described earlier, we're not able to do our best work for our clients either. So it's like a win-win-win. I also was like dancing around when you were saying know the laws and legislation, because
I knew that's where you were going. I was waiting for it. I knew it.
Yeah.
But it's true. It might not be the most exciting stuff to learn about, but when you do learn about it, it can also help you feel a little less nervous about putting those boundaries in place, because it's not just you, Amy or Lisa or Kate, like being the person who's being the squeaky wheel. You're just sharing the rules that were in place, hopefully.
And the
for a
sad part
reason.
of that is we're usually the only ones that know the law well enough. Special education usually is the one that knows the law well enough. My last school district, I did spend a lot of time telling even admin, like, no, we legally can't do this, or we can't provide that service because of X, Y, and Z. We had to really explain a lot of our decision making. And that's what kind of also adds to our stressors, explaining our job, explaining that we do have knowledge, explaining why we're making this decision. If you had to just imagine doing a therapy session. I'm in a private practice now, so I have a lot of parents who sit in a session, and I find myself kind of explaining what I'm doing or why I'm doing it this way. And so just imagine having someone second guess every decision you're making, like not just your self-doubt, right? But just someone, a real person, outside person, third person talking to you saying, oh, you changed that dosage of therapy. Why'd you do that? And that's how IEP meetings feel to some people, where it's like all my decisions are being questioned, not because they're doubting you, but they also don't have that knowledge that, oh, we don't need to be seeing 30 minutes. And I'll talk about that too later. But for one of the strategies, like, you don't have to be seeing 30 minutes twice a week. That's just an arbitrary dose that we've kind of got used to providing. But that's where it comes from. Like, explaining yourself is tedious, but if you do that enough and you work at the same place long enough, which is also an issue, we don't have many people staying put long enough, those stressors kind of go away as persistent as you get. So consistency is really, really important for a lot of the things we're mentioning today. It won't happen in just 1 year. Your first year is going to be the roughest, but the second year, when you already get used to all the changes you make, your work habits adjust and your work habits become more efficient.
And for anyone who does want to learn more about dosage and frequency, we do have an episode on that with Dr. Mary Beth Schmidt, who wrote one of the papers related to this. So, and our minds were completely blown. It's not 2 times 30 or 3 times 15 or whatever it is that your professional norm or what your professional culture, your workplace culture dictates. So in addition to learning about the laws and regulations, re-educating yourself on effective dosage and frequency, what we learned was that it can have a positive impact on things like caseload and workload. And we will link that episode in the show notes for anyone who wants to listen. I was wondering if you could maybe list a few resources for us if someone is listening and if they are new in the field, or if they don't have access to knowledge related to rules, regulations, policies, where might someone go to learn that information? I'm thinking of union reps or anyone is there typically a position or a resource that someone can go to get better versed in that kind of thing?
Absolutely. You can go online and look for information on IDEA. The education website provides a lot of resources for parents, and that's actually very helpful to understand all the jargon of legislation, using those parent handouts, and even for your state. So your state education website should have clear definitions of the disabilities that we diagnose, the disabilities that are provided for special education. Also ask your special education directors. They should have resources as well. If you're new to the field, or you're in your clinical fellowship here in the schools, it's very important to reach out to the special education director. If your district has a lead speech therapist, they should have all that information for you, because it also varies by state. States, I've worked in Georgia, Florida, and Texas, and yes, the communication disorders stay the same, but the regulations are very different. Even the diagnostic determination in Florida, it's not as stringent as Texas. Texas, I have to have below 7 percentile, and they have different definitions. So always look to see what definitions they have for what is considered a disorder.
It's also interesting working across other states just to recognize. I was chatting with an SLP in New Jersey the other day, and they have, I think it's 90 days to complete an evaluation, whereas in Massachusetts, I have 30. So just being aware of differences from state to state and how that might affect you if you're an SLP who's school-based and might be moving from one state to another. Also kind of rereading all of that information for your new state, just to be aware of what changes may be in place in your new location. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the idea of a time audit. I read this in your article and I loved it because I thought it was super action oriented and just a way to, like, okay, I'm feeling burnt out. where do I start? I think it's like a nice way to wrap your head around some places that you might start.
Yeah. Have you ever felt at the end of the day, you're like, wow, where did my day go? And you had a list of things you wanted to do, but probably the day went by, but you got maybe 2 out of the 10 things that were on that list. Um, Doing a time audit kind of centers you and kind of, you know, makes you slow down and become very intentional with what you're doing. So if you just pick one day that you feel like you have a lot of stuff to do, a lot of deadlines, a lot of clients to see, and you figure out, okay, I have this many breaks throughout the day. I'm going to put a timer to see how long it takes me to do whatever I sit down to do on my computer. So if you get to your school, some people get to, let's say your start time is 8. I would get, or 7:20 if you're in elementary school, depending on where, what setting you're in. You sit down, you open your computer, and you start a timer. Okay. For that 20 minutes, I answered emails. And then my first session started. It also might be you took 20 minutes to answer emails, but in that 20 minutes, you also checked your phone. You also got up to get coffee. You also went and got the materials out. So time audit will kind of bring that to light if you're actually paying attention to what it is you're spending your time on. And this is not in any way like you're not supposed to have any fun. You're not supposed to pause and talk to anyone. What you do by time auditing, what you do is really focus, okay, it only takes me 10 minutes to update 3 goals if I have no interruptions. So in your mind, you should say, okay, this shouldn't be that time consuming if I can do it in 10 minutes. So the next time you have a 10-minute free block, I can update an IEP really quick. So that's the gist of it. Where is my time going? What am I really doing during that time that I've set aside for this? And how long does it really take me to do a task?
I love it because it's such like I've done versions of this myself, and I found that I have no idea that like I had my mental idea of how much I could get done in a set period of time was way off base in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Yeah. And like a really good thing that I like to do is I write a list of the top 3 things I need to get done. I don't make a list of 10 things. I make a list of these are the top 3 things I need to get done by the end of today. And that helps me feel a little bit more empowered of what I got these 3 things accomplished. I'm happy. It's on Twitter. A lot of academics call it the bare minimums, and then they put actual bear icons like these are the 3 bare minimums of the day to feel accomplished and feel good about myself. And that's half the battle, feeling good about what you do, because that also it helps with the personal accomplishment. We want to keep that high. So whatever you need to do to get your personal accomplishment pillar filled, personal accomplishment cup filled. But another thing that I like to do is if I am doing tasks and I'm like, oh, I got to do this one thing, and I go off and do another task, I write that task down on my list and cross it off. Like that wasn't on my list, but it's something I did today, and that's something you can put on your list so that you feel like, oh, I did things. Because that way you feel like you actually got your list done, may have added a few things here and there, but you still have this sense of accomplishment towards the end of the day.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that when you're doing the timer setting and you're like encompassing all the things you do in the task. I also like that a lot because like you said, like we aren't robots. Like we aren't like I can't be 100% on task for 8 hours straight. Like I just physically can't do that. So I think it's nice too to incorporate those other things. Like sometimes you need to go pee, and sometimes
Yeah.
you chat with your office mate for a few seconds. Like I think that incorporating that into the time that it takes to do a task is really helpful. And it makes me think about your analogy about like the rubber balls and the glass balls, because if you're doing something like a time study and you get a better idea of how long it takes you to do those glass ball things, like one aspect of working in a school, and I've worked in a bunch of different schools in Massachusetts and Ohio, and in all of those settings, like the way that you usually have your day structured is you have your time with students and then you have some amount of like discretionary time, preparation time, whatever they call it. But that's really the only time you have in your day to get all of those non-student facing tasks done. So if you can better fill that with your like glass ball activities and you have a realistic idea about how long those glass ball activities take, like that right there can be very de-stressing just to have that organization in place, don't you think?
It really makes me also think about previous conversations we've had related to self-advocacy and negotiating in your workplace. Because if you have that data, you've done that timing analysis, and you know that an evaluation takes you X amount of time, but your administrators thinks it takes you 30 minutes because they don't understand your job or they don't really understand, what it is you do in the building, which unfortunately is the case. You can take that data to advocate for different caseload allocations or more prep time or a lower evaluation rates or whatever it is you think will improve your workplace culture or your amount of bandwidth for work tasks.
Yeah, and the thing about providing data to your administration, so your admin, they have some control over what you do. It also depends. So I'm going to say this, but it really depends on the district that you're in. So some school districts have, SLPs have autonomy. If you have multiple sites, they don't necessarily pick on you that much. But if you're at your one school and your supervisor is your admin, it makes it really hard to say, this is why I have Fridays completely free. I need to do all of this paperwork, including evaluations, including completing those evaluations. It's not that I'm not busy during that time. So providing that data also shows a reason for not doing extra duty, not having to be in the hallways for teacher duty when you're, if you're in a middle school, you have to monitor the hall during switching times, or after school drop off, those types of things where you don't necessarily have that extra time because you have all these other responsibilities that you want to get done within contract time. That showing that time audit is going to help your case for that. I haven't had to do duty because of that.
And I feel like you're talking about another question that we had, which was getting burnout before it becomes burnout. So if I feel like I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling extra stressed, and it's not just this month. It was last month, and every month I think next month will be better, and it's not. What are some strategies we can try and utilize to mitigate burnout before it's becoming a big problem? And I feel like the time study is like a great starting point. You already mentioned advocating, things like duties. I think that's another really big piece. Like if you're a building-based person and you're doing bus duty or you're out at recess, maybe having that conversation. Are there other things that other suggestions that might help?
Yeah, figuring out what the stressors versus if they're temporary or if they're permanent. If is it a cyclical problem or is it a temporary problem? Like I said a little bit earlier, then making sure that that thing that's causing you stress, if it's something that always happens every month at the same time, like we are having the same issue, even though we try to fix it. What's going on? If you keep having that IEP meeting spring up on you from the same case manager every time there's an IEP and it's causing you a lot of stress, this is where you can have those crucial conversations with this person, saying, hey, this is causing me a lot of stress. Please give me enough notice so I can make sure that, or let me know a month in advance that this IEP is happening so that I have adequate time to prepare for the IEP. And that's a very specific problem to have. But having those crucial conversations with the individuals that might be causing that cyclical problem is important. If it's a temporary problem, perhaps you have IEP meetings that are coming up that have lawyers in them or advocates that you are feeling this initial stressor, like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to say. What am I going to do? What if they find out I'm a fraud? That imposter syndrome that we feel all the time because we're in a helping profession. We know it's temporary. And a lot of the strategies we can do for those temporary problems is seek social support. That's where a lot of my dissertation was on, providing social support for stressed out SLPs, because that is a really key feature of our community. So it's really important to provide social support as a resource for SLPs. School-based therapists are often, by themselves in their classroom, doing things isolated. And as soon as we provide support, we can continue talking about it. Like right now we're offering support to SLPs. It might not be social, but because we're not talking to them right now, but we are definitely providing them support in a certain way. And I just remembered what I was going to say. So if your issue, what's causing you stress, is temporary, and you have an IEP coming up that will have a few lawyers in it, and you just feel this sense of dreading, you're dreading it. You don't feel confident, your imposter syndrome is coming up. Seek other SLPs who have experienced what you're about to experience. This is your first IEP with a lawyer. That's what's causing you. Like, I don't know what I'm going to say. Or I don't know what to expect. Seeking that information, seeking support, even if you need support to say, like, I know what I need. Like I've asked Kate and Amy for a lot of support throughout this presentation and throughout this conversation we're having, just to get like, hey, you're doing great. That does wonders for someone. And then know that stressor is temporary. So a really big thing is to decide, what are your stressors? What is temporary? What is cyclical? Cyclical problems usually need the most work. And those are the ones you either want to target over time. You target it using those crucial conversations. Perhaps you need to have those crucial conversations with your administrators, with your other case managers, other speech therapists. Maybe it's your supervisor. If that cyclical problem is that you are getting 2 or 3 new referrals every week and you don't have enough time to evaluate them, like you're really out of time. Maybe your supervisor can help, but you have to ask. You're not going to get, this is something I also tell a lot of my clients, you can't get an answer that you want if you don't ask. You're going to get no either way if you don't ask, right?
It's such a good point, and I think in some ways it goes back to that like uncomfortable feeling about setting boundaries, right? Like if you're uncomfortable setting boundaries, you're probably also uncomfortable asking for things that you need, which is like setting boundaries is just a flavor within that continuum of getting what you need, right? I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit more about the crucial conversations, because in the paper, the examples that were in there, I was like, oh, these are just like the yucky, like uncomfortable, stressful conversations that get like your palms sweating before you even have the conversation. But they're crucial. So if you can tell us a little bit about why they're so important for us to like have them.
Yeah, any conversation that is high stakes. So your high stakes situations is your well-being. Your high stakes is your job. Your job might be impacted. You might not even like confrontation. That might be considered a high stakes because it's something that you're out of your comfort zone. So those conversations that have those senses, that make those senses kind of heighten, are going to be crucial. You wouldn't want to have you wouldn't have the idea to have a conversation if it wasn't going to help you. So what we really have to realize that, and you don't have to put this if you want, it might be a little bit controversial, but we're in a shortage right now for speech therapy. Speech therapists are needed. Use that to your advantage. You are not going to get fired. You are needed. They need you to be covered. They need you to, they need you there. There's no way that as long as you are not providing, the worst unevidence-based therapy, if you are actually, trying to attempt to see your kids, you're doing your best at providing therapy, you're doing your best to get all your paperwork done, you're doing your best. They're not going to fire you for having a conversation that you are trying to help get support for yourself. However, there are situations where your superior might not be a person that you feel comfortable doing so. Find someone who you feel comfortable having this conversation with. It may not even be someone who has power to change. It might be your coworker. Like, hey, I need to talk to you about this. I'm going to pretend you're my superior. Let me have this conversation with you and give me some feedback. Because I know not everyone is blessed to have a superior who might be easygoing, who might not have a lot of repercussions. So that fear of there might be repercussions, and there's systems in place to allow for these kind of conversations to happen in the workplace. And if there isn't, you need to move districts. Like, you need to get out of that situation, because it's not okay. You should feel comfortable having conversations with people who are higher up than you on the ladder, because those people are there to serve you. Does that make sense? Like, they're higher up, but they are here to make sure that we are having a really good culture in our campus. That's an admin duty. They need to make sure that the culture of their campus is positive. They need to make sure that their culture, or that their staff feels safe on campus. So if you're already feeling like you're not feeling safe on campus to talk to your administrators with complete ease and complete conversationality, then there's an issue, a bigger issue at play. So I like to tell my students, I know my clients, I know my whole purpose is to keep SLPs in the setting where they're in, but there's a lot of situations where that is not feasible and I'm not recommended.
All of what you're saying is making me think about something you said earlier related to how this is more difficult for someone in their first year. I'm imagining trying to overcome all of these hurdles, my imposter syndrome, my, being brand new in a job and wanting to keep my job, everything for reasons related to health insurance and my salary, not wanting to create waves, not wanting to create, quote, enemies, and all of the fear that might come along with self-advocating and having some of these critical conversations. I'm also thinking about how this might be particularly difficult for an SLP who is the only SLP in a district and doesn't necessarily have colleagues to corroborate, the time analysis of, no, it actually does take us more than a half an hour to write a report or whatever it is. And how many other contextual variables might really make some of these strategies feel more difficult versus, let's say, a seasoned SLP who's in a department of 16 other SLPs. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I remember my clinical fellowship year. Everything we were talking about was heightened. I didn't want to talk to my admin, even though I knew my admin was in the wrong. Like, I was like, no, that doesn't make me feel comfortable. I'm staying in my room. I am not going to have that crucial conversation. And that's okay. Your first year, you're going to have a lot of those barriers. And I'm hoping that, that person stays in that setting and then just adjusts for the second year. We have to know going in that your first year in any job is going to be hard. It's a transition because it's new. A lot of the time, graduate students being in the school, not just being in the school, but your clinical fellowship year is the first time you probably have a full-time 12-hour-a-day job, depending on the setting. And it's going to be a lot no matter where you are. So just knowing that you have time to change, have time to adjust. That first year is going to be a year of adjustment. But absolutely, I would not have said anything to I wouldn't have had crucial conversations that first year. And I probably didn't. And that's probably why I left.
Well, if anyone out there is listening and is feeling overly intimidated by these critical conversations, or if you are the only SLP in your district, or you are brand new to the field and feel some of these strategies are insurmountable, we happen to know someone who has a business who is just available to help you with just such a thing. And I can vouch for the fact that you're very approachable, very friendly, very helpful, and very reachable. So we will make sure to put your business information in the show notes for anybody who is just looking to have a little bit of support or extra nudge in one direction or another if any of these barriers ring true.
Thank you.
I wonder if we can talk just a little bit. I know we're getting short on time, but we've talked a little bit about things to do to mitigate burnout before it becomes a problem. I wonder if there's anything additional or different that you would do if you haven't been able to mitigate it and you get to the point where you're like, oh no, I'm super burned out. What do I do?
And that happens. I have had so many conversations with SLPs who've been in this field for 30 years and they're feeling it now. 30 years. I'm like, good job for making it so far without feeling that way. What I tell them is to start slow. Pick one thing and work at that, because 30 years is a long time to make habits, and it's going to take some time to make those changes. For my dissertation, I did support groups with SLPs across the country, and I did have a lot of SLPs who were seasoned and they 20 plus years, and they worked through lunch. They've worked through lunch most of their career. And the 6-week support group that we had, I said, okay, by the end of the support group, I really want you to not work through lunch. And it took them a long time, a lot of effort to not turn on the computer, to have 30 minutes of not working. Eat your sandwich outside, eat your sandwich in the car. That's something I do. I go to my car and have my lunch in my car so that I have a break from talking to anybody. No one's going to talk to me in the lunchroom about anything work related. I'm not going to answer my email. I'm going to scroll social media. I'm going to watch a YouTube video while I'm eating, something that is not work related, and have that break. But it does take time. So the more time you've practiced inefficient habits that have caused more stress, reduced your resources as a speech therapist, you're going to continue doing that because it's a habit. It's something that we do consistently. And I think the saying is it takes 22 days to break a habit. So it really is effortful. So definitely starting slow, picking one thing to change that will have positive impact on you. I know in the article we mentioned a lot of other things, but I think that's been the most effective way of mitigating that. It's like, pick one thing that's going to help you and then adjust moving forward.
I love that lunch example for lots. I'm also a car lunch person.
I have received many phone
Kindle
calls
out.
from Amy in her car in the middle of the day.
No video. Yeah, it's just like,
Yeah.
it's nice because you're in a literally different physical space too. So if you're already somebody who has trouble like closing your door, or if you're in a shared office, like just being in a different physical space kind of, I think, helps promote that disconnect a little bit. And I find it really helps me be more engaged when I go back in too. And I think that is another piece that resonated for me in the conversation we've been having with you today, in the paper that you wrote, Dr. Farquharson. I think, these things that we're doing are better for us as like human being people, but they're also making us better able to do the work we're there to do when we're at work. Also, lunch is super important. I love that example. I also love that it is something that happens every day. So thinking about it as like framing it like you're changing sort of a bad habit. I'm using air quotes. I don't have a better way to describe that, but thinking about, I'm trying to change my bad habits to be, mitigating my burnout. Doing something every single day is a nice way to practice changing that habit too. So if you can think of something like lunch, or maybe like reserving your planning time or prep time to get specific tasks done, and you're going to be able to practice that every day, I think is also really helpful. So thanks for that.
Another really easy, fun one, I guess, yeah, is reducing your exposure to email throughout the day. Don't have your email open, because the dings, it's evidence-based, the dings will distract you from the task that you're attending to. So have a specific time where you check email. Make sure your phone email is turned off after the workday is over. Those little things add up over time, and you don't realize how much time you spend answering emails. Take back your time.
I feel like I'm leaving today with so many strategies, and I'm so grateful.
Good.
Do you have any final words of wisdom or final recommendations for our listeners before we wrap up?
I do. I wish there was a wand I can wave to fix it all. An easy answer for everyone. Like there's not just one solution that fits all. But the reality is that our experiences vary, and like we're gonna fix our situation. It's gonna take time. Change is slow, but it's happening. Become a member of your state association. They're the ones that are going to help make those changes for your state, for your school level. They're the ones supporting your school legislature. But yeah, you're not alone. Ask for help. It's hard to ask for help, and it's okay to ask for help. Take a step back, and it's okay also to say, this isn't working for me, and change your setting, change your job, and get ahead of the dread. Remember why you do this.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you again to our corporate sponsor, Practice Perfect EMR. Billing, scheduling, documentation, patient communication, business metrics, and more. Practice Perfect EMR specializes in speech therapy practices like yours, connecting everything. Check them out at www.practiceperfectemr.com.
Thank you so much for joining us in today's episode. As always, you can use this episode for ASHA CEUs. You can also potentially use this episode for other credits depending on the regulations of your governing body. To determine if this episode will count towards professional development in your area of study, please check in with your governing bodies, or you can go to our website, www.slpnerdcast.com. All of the references and information listed throughout the course of the episode will be listed in the show notes. And as always, if you have any questions, please email us at info@slpnerdcast.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to welcome you back here again soon.